Introducing again what we would like to do during this presentation. We'd like to introduce the CLI process, provide you with information on the initiative, what happened between the 9th and 10th meetings, and introduce the processes that led up to the adoption of decision VC 10.3 on the same CLI initiative. We'll look at the key considerations during the CLI process for both environmentally sound management and transboundary movements of hazardous waste and other waste. The main focus of the presentation will be to present the decision itself and its elements. We'd like to inform you about what actions we've taken so far to implement the decision, both within the Secretariat and outside, whether that be by parties themselves, by other stakeholders, by BCRCs, just to give you a snapshot of the activities since COP10, including those relating to entry into force of the ban amendment, the work of the technical expert who's mandated to complete the development of a framework for the environmentally sound management of hazardous waste and other waste, and other elements of the CLI decision as Decision 10.3 has now become known. So, looking into the historical context, what is the ban amendment and how is it connected to the CLI process and this decision? At the second meeting of the Conference of the Parties in March 1994, the parties adopted a decision whereby they agreed to prohibit immediately all transboundary movements of hazardous waste that were intended for final disposal operations from OECD to non-OECD states. In that same decision, the parties also decided to phase out by the end of the year, 31st of December 1997, and prohibit from that date all transboundary movements of hazardous waste that were intended for recovery or recycling operations, also from OECD to non-OECD states. At its next meeting in 1995, the parties adopted a further decision, Decision 3.1, whereby this was made into an amendment to the Convention, and that became known as the ban amendment, adding a new Article 4A and a new Annex 7 into the Convention text. Following the adoption of this amendment to the Convention, there were differing views among parties about the requirement for entry into force of amendments in accordance with the Convention's provisions. Various interpretations came to light about how to understand these provisions, and there was no agreement about whether the threshold had been met for the ban amendment or about what the threshold was for any other amendment to the Convention in general. Following a length of time that elapsed after the adoption of the ban amendment, the President of the 9th meeting of the Conference of the Parties made a statement on the way forward on the ban amendment. And this sought to launch a process which would reaffirm the objectives of the ban amendment and to explore means by which they could be achieved. The President of the COP9, the 9th meeting of the Conference of the Parties, called on all the parties to expedite ratification of the ban amendment so to facilitate its entry into force and allow achievement of its objectives. He also called on all the parties to create enabling conditions through, among other measures, country-led initiatives conducive to attaining the objectives of the amendment. And based on this statement, Indonesia and Switzerland initiated their country-led initiative to improve the effectiveness of the Basel Convention. As you can see from these two main bullet points, the lead country's objective was to develop recommendations for the 10th meeting of the Conference of the Parties for a way forward to protect vulnerable countries without adequate capacity to enable them to manage hazardous waste in an environmentally sound manner and to protect them from unwanted imports of hazardous waste and ensure that transboundary movements, especially to developing countries, constituted an environmentally sound management of those wastes as required by the Basel Convention. It was intended as a process to reaffirm and explore means to achieve the objectives of the Ban Amendment. In doing so, the lead countries undertook several activities to, among other things, analyze movements of hazardous waste, looking at the quantity of waste moved, the reasons for the movement, and consequences of mismanagement, and also develop proposals for promoting environmentally sound management, or ESM. So they were really looking at how to ensure that if there was a transboundary movement of waste, then those would ensure the environmentally sound management of waste. And this you will see when we go into the elements of the decision. Were the underlying factor throughout ensuring environmentally sound management environmentally sound management of these wastes. So at COP10, there was an agreement reached. It was a very big step forward that ended this deadlock and adopted the CLI decision. Based on the discussions and findings during the CLI process. There were 7 sections to Decision 10.3, which is also known as the CLI decision. The decision addresses entry into force of the Ban Amendment, the development of guidelines for the environmentally sound management, the provision of further legal clarity, further strengthening the Basel Convention regional and coordinating centres, combating illegal traffic, assisting developing countries that are facing specific challenges, and building capacity. We'll go into the details of these sections in just a minute. If I could just ask you to bear with me for a minute. I just have a small technical problem to address. Sorry. My apologies for that delay. Just to return to our presentation, thank you for bearing with me. As I said a minute ago, there are 7 sections to this decision. There have subsequently been many comments that the decision reinforces the Basel Convention control regime, whilst also supporting the environmentally sound management and trade in waste. To ensure that impacts on the environment and health are minimized, and to ensure adequate social and labor conditions. We'll just go through very briefly what were the different sections. The first one addressed entry into force of the Ban Amendment. It included welcoming initiatives and actions that have been taken so far, and encouraging and inviting parties to continue to take concrete actions to encourage and assist parties to ratify the Ban Amendment. And that could include specific actions. There was, for example, actions by the Nordic Initiative that were mentioned within the text of the decision. It also mentioned regional meetings, country-specific studies, and the parties, most importantly within this section, agreed to an interpretation of paragraph 5 of Article 17 on amendments to the Convention, and noted that this agreement clarified the requirement for amendments to the Convention to enter into force, and that, of course, would include the ban amendment. The CLI decision also noted that the ban amendment is one way of meeting the challenge with regard to controlling imports of waste to parties that are unable to manage hazardous and other waste in an environmentally sound manner, but noted that there are other manners, and we'll look shortly at how this is being translated in practice. Section B looked at guidelines for environmentally sound management of waste. It looked at disseminating information as well as completing the development of a framework for the environmentally sound management of waste, including considering ways in which this framework could be might be linked to the issue of transboundary movement of hazardous and other waste. A technical expert group was mandated and established to do this work, taking into account elements that were listed in an annex to the decision. The technical expert group has since been established and is made up of 30 members nominated by parties based on representation of the 5 regional groups of the United Nations. And here we'll just have a quick reminder that a lot of what the CLI process was looking at was why transboundary movements were taking place when environmentally sound management could not be assured. So this work certainly goes a long way in that direction, it is hoped. As does the next section, which was on providing further legal clarity, and the Secretariat was requested to prepare 2 reports. Firstly, a report on terminology, looking at a study on the implementation of the Convention as it relates to interpretation of certain terminology used in the Convention, and a list of other relevant terms. And this included, for example, waste and non-waste, which is always a reoccurring question for many stakeholders involved in implementation of the Convention. And this report on terminology was also to look at possible options for the interpretation of the terms. Comments were invited from parties, following which the report was to be finalized and submitted to the 8th meeting of the open-ended working group for its consideration. And then the OEWG, as it's known, was to prepare draft guidance for consideration by the Conference of the Parties at its 11th meeting. The second element of Section C refers to a study on use and end-of-life goods. At this point, I would mention that the Secretariat was to be assisted by legal and technical experts as appropriate when preparing these 2 reports. And the study was to identify options for dealing with the problem posed by used and end-of-life goods, which could include take-back obligations and clarification of the concept of charitable donations. The study would also take into account other initiatives such as the Partnership for Action on Computing Equipment. The study was also made available to parties for comments, submitted to the OEWG, after which further work is being prepared for consideration by the COP11 meeting. And we shall look into this further work and path forward in just a minute. There were also sections D to G, as you can see there. Section D on strengthening the BCRCs. And in that section, the Conference of the Parties noted that many of the proposals included in the Country-Led Initiative involve efforts that are best taken at the regional and sub-regional levels, and therefore the BCRCs are ideally placed to take them forward. There was also considerable work requested on combating illegal traffic more effectively, assisting parties, developing countries that are facing specific challenges with regard to prohibiting import of hazardous waste, and building capacity. So what happened after COP10? In relation to addressing the entry into force of the ban amendment, to date there have been 2 global workshops either undertaken or shortly to be undertaken on facilitation of the entry into force of the ban amendment. the first in Senegal in September 2012, and the second in El Salvador in February 2013, so to take place very shortly. And the idea is to allow for information exchange between those parties who are participating, and to provide information on both the processes and the ban amendment itself. As you can see from the slide, the technical expert group has been established and held 3 meetings since COP10. The first in Japan in April 2012, the second in Geneva in September 2012, and the third just recently in Lyon, Switzerland in January 2013. Following the work, the group has finalized the draft report, the draft framework, and this shall be submitted to the Conference of the Parties at its 11th meeting for consideration and possible adoption. The revised draft framework for the ESM of hazardous waste and other waste will be set out in an addendum to a meeting document that should shortly be made available on the Basel Convention website, as well as the Synergy's website, under the meeting documents page. In relation to Section C, the report on terminology and the study were both put forward for comment and considered at the OWG 8 meeting. And as you can see there, there was a request for, or an invitation for further comments by 15th of February 2013. And that was a request following the OWG 8 meeting, which considered both the guidance, the report and the study. And it has requested the Secretariat to look at and prepare for the COP11 meeting a draft glossary of terms, options for interpretation of the terms, and those comments will also be compiled for consideration by the COP11 meeting. There have been 2 circulations of compilations of national lists of prohibited hazardous waste, which were requested on a 6-monthly basis by Section F of the decision. And the Secretariat maintains a database of notifications transmitted to it, which includes these national lists as they become available. Within Section D, the regional and coordinating centres have played a key role in the implementation of activities in support of the Decision 10.3, including, as you saw from Section A, hosting 2 workshops in coordination with the Secretariat to facilitate the entry into force of the ban amendment, participation as observers in meetings of the technical expert group, and production of other activities, publications in support of the other sections of the decision. That includes participation in, for example, a small meeting with enforcement networks under the section E. Under this section, fact sheets on enforcement networks and organizations have been developed in cooperation with these networks and made available on the website. And as mentioned a minute ago, we have the national list of hazardous waste. We also have forwarded an invitation from the Conference of the Parties to the World Health Organization, and are continuing in activities with our international and other partners and cooperating with them in order to respond to the request to build capacity under Section G. So which way forward at COP11? COP11 will certainly have before it a draft decision on the DLI for its consideration, and we'll have to decide on the way forward in relation to this work. In particular, decisions will need to be taken on sections A to C of the COP10 text and decision. COP11, for example, will have to take a decision in relation to the future of the technical expert group, which was mandated to work until the upcoming COP meeting. A further webinar will be held in the near future on specifically the TEG and its work. So we would please invite you to consult the website for more information that will be upcoming shortly. In the meantime, the work does go on to support and assist parties in all the aspects related to Decision 10.3, as well as the wider implementation of the Convention as a whole. Just as an example, a further compilation of national lists will be circulated in or around April 2013. The Secretariat also continues to provide assistance to parties and other stakeholders on request in relation to national legislation, illegal traffic, questions on how to ratify the Convention and the ban amendment, as well as the protocol on liability, for example. And we are certainly open to help support the parties as may be needed. So on that note, we'll take questions in just a minute, and please do feel free to contact the Secretariat in terms of any other questions that you may have relating to this decision or any follow-up action. Thank you.